decorated Marine-turned-CEO learns he has twins. When his ex surprises him at a military charity ball, that's when he decided to act. But before we dive into the full story, let me know where you're watching from and what time it is. Now, subscribe to the channel, and let's get started. The ballroom shimmered with the glow of crystal chandeliers, and the melodic hum of a live orchestra filled the air. Attendees, many in pressed uniforms adorned with medals and ribbons, mingled among sleekly dressed dignitaries and philanthropic socialites. This night was more than just another social event. It was the annual charity ball for military families, a place where tributes to service and reminders of sacrifice blended seamlessly with the clink of champagne glasses. Colton Walker, former Marine officer turned CEO of a highly successful private security company, stood at the center of it all. Fresh out of a quick chat with a local official, he took a moment to survey the scene. His reflection on the polished marble floor and the proud glint of the medals on his lapel served as a silent testament to how far he'd come. Physically, he looked the part of the powerful businessman, tall, broad-shouldered, and sporting a finely tailored tuxedo that framed his strong build. Yet, beneath that polished facade, the same steely discipline he'd honed on countless missions for the Marines remained intact. He'd been hailed as the guest of honor tonight. His philanthropic contributions had funded everything from scholarships for veterans' children to mental health programs for service members returning home. He had spent months planning this ball with the organizing committee, ensuring each dollar raised went directly to the cause closest to his heart. To onlookers, he was the epitome of a self-made man who had not only survived the crucible of war but had thrived upon returning, forging a booming enterprise that protected high-profile clients worldwide. Still, underneath the neat shine of success, Colton carried memories of battle that clung to him like a whisper in the dark. Perhaps that was why he devoted so much of his time and money to helping others heal. While he'd seldom reveal it to the public, those who knew him closely understood. For Colton, this cause was personal. He had lost more comrades than he cared to count, and each philanthropic act felt like a promise kept to their memory. Tonight's event took place in an opulent grand hotel, replete with high-arched windows and glimmering chandeliers draped in patriotic colors. A silent auction, featuring items like signed memorabilia from famous athletes and luxurious vacation packages, lined one side of the ballroom. In the corner, a small stage had been set up with a microphone, where Colton was scheduled to address the guests. The energy in the room hinted that well over $1 million in donations would be raised before the night was through. "Mr. Walker, we're ready for you," a young coordinator said softly, tugging at Colton's sleeve with deference. Colton took a deep breath, stepped onto the stage, and waited for the applause to subside. Cameras flashed as he began his speech, his baritone voice resonating in the hush of the ballroom. "Good evening, everyone. Thank you for coming together to support the men and women who defend our freedoms and the families who wait at home, counting the days until they return. As someone who once served, I know the cost of that duty. The sacrifices go beyond what we see on the news. They are felt in empty chairs around dinner tables, in missed holidays, in the quiet struggles when our heroes come home changed by the realities of conflict. Tonight, we gather to support those families, to offer resources they need, and to ensure that no one who has served stands alone in their fight." A wave of applause rippled through the crowd. Colton's gaze drifted across the sea of faces, uniforms, evening gowns, black ties, and shiny medals. He recognized so many from prior years: general officers, retired veterans, local politicians, business moguls. But tonight, at the far end of the room, his attention caught on a figure he hadn't seen before, or at least hadn't seen in a long while. A woman in an elegant midnight blue dress stood near the back, her posture hesitant, her eyes anchored on him. In that single heartbeat, his mind stumbled. Grace. He momentarily lost his train of thought, his carefully prepared words faltering as if ripped from his mind. The distant memory of her laugh and the way she had once made him feel all came crashing back. For an instant, the chatter in the ballroom grew hushed, as if the crowd sensed a sudden shift in his energy. Grace. They'd shared something special once, a breathless, intense bond forged just before his final deployment. They had parted hastily. Mission orders had come through and he'd left for a dangerous overseas tour. By the time he returned, scarred both physically and emotionally, months had gone by with no contact, no closure. He threw himself into building his company, and she had seemed to vanish into thin air. He'd never forgotten her, though he'd convinced himself that chapter was closed. Now, seeing her here, the electric jolt that shot through him made his heart pound. He blinked, forced a polite smile, and pushed forward with his speech. "Families, we raise our glass to them tonight," he concluded, voice wavering just slightly, "because their strength often goes unrecognized, yet it is the bedrock on which our nation's heroes stand. Thank you." The applause was robust. Colton nodded in appreciation before stepping off the stage, every nerve humming. He navigated the throng of well-wishers, handshakes, and quick photos, each one a haze of forced smiles. He wanted to find her. No, he needed to. But she was nowhere in sight. The coordinator invited him to sit at the head table with generals and local dignitaries, but his mind raced. Grace was here, in the same room. What would he say? Did she hate him for never coming back properly? For not writing? The possibilities weighed on him. While waiters served a 3-course dinner, Colton scanned the room discreetly. She didn't appear to be at any of the tables near him. The intense press of obligations, the polite conversation with donors, the unspoken necessity to act the polished host, clashed with the swirl in his chest. Finally, dessert arrived. A swirl of shimmering chocolate sauce on a plate that Colton barely touched. Then came the main auction. The crowd was in high spirits, raising paddles to bid on exclusive items. But Colton's mind wasn't on any of that. He needed a moment alone. Politely excusing himself, he slipped away from the table, crossing the dance floor toward a quieter corner near the grand doorway. And there she was. Grace stood near a marble pillar, elegantly poised yet visibly nervous. Up close, her dark hair framed her face in soft waves. Her eyes flickered with uncertainty, capturing that moment between wanting to vanish and mustering the courage to speak. At her side, just a step behind, were 2 small figures, children. They looked about 4 years old, 1 boy, 1 girl, dressed in miniature formal attire. The boy held a tiny American flag, and the girl clutched a satin pouch shaped like a star. Their resemblance to each other was uncanny, identical, down to their matching inquisitive expressions. Colton's breath caught in his throat. The children were the spitting image of, well, him. The realization thundered through his mind like an artillery barrage. Memories of childhood photos his mother kept surfaced. He'd been told he had that same curl at the end of his hair, the same serious tilt of eyebrows, the same dimple in one cheek that only showed when he half smiled. Time seemed to slow as he approached. He could barely hear the murmured applause from the ongoing auction. His heart pounded as if he'd just sprinted a mile in full gear. Grace, swallowing hard, stepped forward and carefully placed a hand on each child's shoulder, as though drawing strength from them. "Colton," she began softly. He noticed her eyes were glistening, equal parts apprehension and relief. I didn't plan to do this in front of a crowd, but I had no other way to reach you. And I thought, maybe this was the right moment for it." He couldn't find words. His gaze shifted from Grace to the 2 small faces peeking curiously from behind her dress. The boy held that tiny flag more tightly, and the girl's big brown eyes locked onto Colton's with unabashed fascination. "How?" Colton's voice was barely above a whisper, but Grace understood. She exhaled, tears slipping down her cheek. "After you left on that mission, I discovered I was pregnant. I tried. For a while, I tried to find you. But you were gone, and then I heard you were injured. When you finally came back, you had your entire company, and you were in the news with security contracts traveling the globe. I thought, maybe you had moved on, and I was scared. Maybe you wouldn't want this life. The twins stood perfectly still, wide-eyed. In that second, as he looked at them, Colton felt a turbulence of regret, shock, and the fiercest protectiveness he'd ever experienced. He had faced firefights and perilous missions. He'd made decisions in the heat of battle, seen men fall, and yet never had he felt as utterly vulnerable as in that moment, looking into the eyes of these two children he never knew he had. He knelt down to their level. The boy, seeming bold, extended the little flag out to him, as if offering a greeting. The girl fiddled nervously with the star-shaped pouch. Colton's throat felt tight. "Hi," he managed. "I'm Colton." Grace stepped closer, gently resting a hand on his shoulder. "This is Caleb," she gestured to the boy, "and this is Callie. They've heard about you, stories of the brave Marine officer who served his country." She paused, voice trembling. "They don't understand everything, but they know you're their dad." A million emotions slammed through Colton, guilt for the years lost, for the birthdays and first words he had missed, awe at their presence, love that he hadn't anticipated, surging like an unstoppable tide. The sound of applause erupted again from the stage area, signaling the auction's finale. People were turning their heads curiously, noticing the small cluster near the exit. He had to do something, had to bring them in, make them feel they belonged. This moment was too big to keep hidden in shadows. Steadying himself, Colton rose, took the children's hands in his, and led them gently into the main ballroom. Grace followed, tears shining but with a quiet smile. Heads turned, and hushed murmurs spread. At the podium, the auctioneer blinked in surprise. The entire evening had been choreographed around celebrating military families and second chances. Little did anyone expect the guest of honor to have a personal revelation so monumental. Colton felt self-conscious under so many watchful eyes, but he refused to let go of Caleb's and Callie's tiny hands. The swirl of camera lights flashed as if capturing a formal ceremony. Chairs scraped on the floor as people craned their necks to see. General Harrington, an old mentor of Colton's, looked on with puzzlement and then a slow, dawning smile. Standing there, in the middle of the hushed ballroom, Colton cleared his throat, voice shaky with emotion. "Everybody, I'd like you to meet some special guests." He lifted the children so they each perched on one of his arms. They giggled in unison, unafraid of the attention. The crowd, sensing something extraordinary, burst into spontaneous applause. Grace, standing close, found her tension melting at the audience's warmth. This was the moment that would change everything in Colton Walker's life. He was no longer simply the decorated Marine or the high-powered CEO. Now he was something more challenging and far more meaningful. A father who had just discovered the precious gift of 2 little lives. And in that single heartbeat, he realized there was no mission more important than being there for his children. Even so, a swirl of questions loomed. How would he make up for lost time? Would Grace trust him to be the father figure they needed? And what about his demanding role as CEO? Could he scale back for the sake of family? The entire ballroom seemed to hold its breath, waiting for what Colton would say next, or do next. Yet for a moment he simply held his twins close, pressing them against his chest as if to reassure himself that this was real. The hush in the room grew deeper, tears glistening in many eyes. Overhead, the grand chandelier sparkled, a silent witness to fate's surprising twist. But as soon as Colton felt them in his arms, he realized the next fight he was about to engage in wasn't a battle waged overseas, nor against an armed adversary. It was the fight to prove himself worthy of these 2 children who, until mere minutes ago, he didn't even know existed. That fight, he promised himself, he would never abandon. In the quiet after the event, Colton found himself standing outside on a wide stone terrace, the night sky stretched above him like an endless canvas of stars. The hum of conversation and clatter of silverware from the Grand Hotel ballroom drifted through the open doors. He had just guided Grace and the twins to a more private seating area so they could finally talk, really talk, away from the curious eyes of donors and dignitaries. Even though he was dressed in his pristine tuxedo, feeling every bit the successful CEO, his thoughts were spinning in a freefall of conflicting emotions. He had stood on countless stages and stared down entire battalions without flinching, but now, the sight of Caleb and Callie shyly clinging to Grace's dress made him feel off balance in a way he'd never known. This time, the stakes felt higher than any battlefield. Grace approached softly, her heels clicking on the polished stone. Her once confident posture from the past seemed replaced by caution. He could see the remains of tears at the corners of her eyes. With a gentle murmur, she asked the twins to play in a nearby corner of the terrace, where a small area had been temporarily converted into a lounge with cushioned chairs. "I know this is all unexpected," she began, folding her hands as if to keep them from trembling. "When you left for that last deployment, we never had a proper goodbye. Then you were injured, and there was so much going on with your recovery and all the media coverage around your company. She paused, exhaling shakily. "I never knew how to tell you, but I knew someday you'd have a right to meet them." Colton thought of how many times he'd wondered about her after returning stateside. In those first months of civilian life, he had been overwhelmed by physical therapy and the mental toll of stepping back into a world that kept spinning in his absence. Yet in quieter moments when he allowed himself to reflect, memories of Grace always crept in. He'd tell himself she deserved better than the scarred, hollow version of himself who came home from war. Eventually, as his business soared, the demands on his time left him little room to confront his unresolved past, and he'd convinced himself the chapter was over. But that chapter was not just incomplete. It had an entire secret. 2 secrets, in fact, peeking at him from behind Grace's legs. "Why now?" he asked. But the question was asked without anger. If anything, it was laced with regret. Grace's gaze flicked to the twins. "Caleb and Callie have been asking questions about their father, about why they don't have one at home. I realized I was robbing them of the chance to know you. I worried you might resent me for waiting, but I had to try. Then I saw the press release for this charity ball. It felt like a sign, so—" She spread her hands, as if words failed her. Colton nodded, swallowing the tightness in his throat. He glanced at the children. Caleb had apparently found a decorative candle on a table, and he was poking its flameless flicker with a tiny finger, all childlike wonder. Callie was stacking coasters into a neat tower. The simplest gestures felt monumental to him. "Look," he said softly, returning his attention to Grace. "I can't claim to understand all your reasons or to pretend that I wouldn't have handled things differently. But I'm not angry. Shocked, yes. Overwhelmed, but not angry." Her eyes welled with tears of relief. "I want them to know you. I hope that's what you want too. They're incredible kids, Colton." A wave of warmth and pride mingled with sadness for the lost years washed over him. "They are. And I want to, God, I don't know, be in their lives. Support them in every way. I just need some time to figure out how." Grace's eyes shone with an openness he remembered from those early days. "You'll find a way. They deserve to have their father. I hope you and I can be civil, if nothing else." He could still sense the unspoken fear in her voice, that he might reject them, or that the tension between them would create more harm than good. Colton pressed his lips together and, despite the swirl of confusion, wanted to offer her reassurance. "We will be civil. And more than that, maybe we can learn to be partners in this." She nodded, letting relief soften her tense shoulders. Suddenly, a squeal erupted from the children. Caleb had discovered that if he flicked the candle just right, it would flash in different colors, and he was showing Callie with triumphant delight. Grace moved closer to them, resting a hand gently on her son's back, but her gaze flicked to Colton, silently beckoning him to join. He took a cautious step toward them, nearly hesitating, as though stepping into fatherhood was akin to crossing a minefield, one he had no map for. Then he squatted down, finding himself face to face with the two bright-eyed twins. "Hi," he said gently, lifting the flickering candle with a playful wave. "That's pretty neat, isn't it?" Callie nodded earnestly. "It changes color. Blue, red, green. We never had one like this at home." Caleb gave a half-smile. "Mommy said we were coming to see a soldier," he blurted, looking a little shy. Grace cleared her throat. "He's not just a soldier, sweetie. Remember, he was a Marine officer." "That's a kind of soldier," Callie pointed out in that frank way children sometimes do. Colton chuckled softly. "You're right. I served in the Marines," he explained, voice turning gentle. "I guess you could call me a soldier, but the Marines are a special branch of the military. We work on ships and land, all sorts of places." Caleb's eyes went wide. "Ships?" "Yes, big ships," Colton said, letting a tinge of pride color his tone. Then he glanced up at Grace. "Maybe I can tell them stories sometime. The kid-friendly ones, of course." She nodded gratefully. They'd love that. For a few heartbeats, an awkward quiet settled. The children might have felt it too, but they were largely engrossed with the candle and hearing about ships. Meanwhile, the subdued hum of the charity ball continued behind them, but none of that seemed real to Colton at that moment. Everything had narrowed to this brand-new emotional battlefield. Fatherhood. At last, Grace broke the silence. "We should probably head out soon. They're used to an earlier bedtime. I just wanted you to know. To see them." Colton's mind buzzed. Letting them leave now after just discovering them felt like letting a lifeline slip through his hands. "Listen, the event is winding down, but I'm expected to stay a bit longer. There's an after-reception for the donors and a photo session. But maybe... Can we talk more afterward? I'll skip the usual round of handshakes if it means I can see you again tonight. Or if that's too late, maybe breakfast tomorrow." Grace offered a trembling smile. "Breakfast might be better. They'll be tired soon. We're staying at a small hotel around the corner. A friend of mine works there and got us a good rate." He gave a firm nod. "Tell me which one, and I'll be there at 8. Is that okay?" She agreed, rummaging in her purse for a pen and scribbling the name on a small notepad, tearing off the sheet. Then she gently coaxed the twins to say goodbye to Mr. Colton, and he reminded them that next time they could call him Dad if they wanted. As they walked away, the two little faces kept glancing back at him with wide-eyed curiosity. Every step they took, part of his heart lurched, wishing he had more time to keep them close. Finally, they disappeared into the hallway leading to the lobby. Colton lingered on the terrace, momentarily dazed. The vivid swirl of revelations had left him breathless, but as a man accustomed to action, he resolved not to stand idle. He grabbed his phone and dialed his personal assistant. "Dan, I need a few changes to my schedule tomorrow morning. Yes, I know I have that security briefing, but push it, whatever it takes. I have family obligations." A sense of purpose steadied him. He would meet them in the morning, and from that moment forward, he wouldn't allow distance or fear to sever this bond again. Returning inside, he was immediately pulled into polite conversation by dignitaries thanking him for his speech. He smiled, shook hands, offered calm replies, but inside, he was still standing on that terrace, watching those tiny, curious smiles drift away and promising himself that he would never let them become strangers again. Soon, the final portion of the evening's program commenced, a short dance performance by a local military choir. Between songs, someone took the stage with an announcement about an impromptu donation challenge. Mr. Walker has generously offered a personal evening with him, dinner at his private estate, along with a signed copy of his book's foreword for the highest bidder." The crowd chuckled, and though Colton had planned the gesture, he now found it oddly symbolic. Just a short while ago, he'd have performed such philanthropic stunts with easy charm, fully immersed in the business of public image. Now, everything felt different, more personal. He no longer saw these events as mere shows of generosity. He realized the time he spent with big donors and journalists was time away from the two children whose existence he'd just discovered. The sense of sacrifice took on an entirely new meaning. When the number on the donation pledges soared, the crowd roared with approval, and Colton offered his thanks through the microphone, trying not to let his roiling emotions seep into his public persona. The entire ballroom seemed to celebrate him, raising their glasses in toasts, but all he wanted was to quietly slip away and prepare for the breakfast meeting that would change everything. Eventually, the ball concluded, with everyone ushered out by hotel staff. Colton's final duty was a quick photo line with some of the most prominent donors, an obligatory handshake, a flash, a polite half-bow of gratitude. Then, at last, he was free. He made his way back through the corridor where he'd last seen Grace and the kids. The hallway was empty now, except for a single staff member picking up stray glasses. Outside, the black night sky seemed as calm as ever, but inside Colton's chest, the thunder was just beginning. He offered a short salute to the doorman and stepped into his waiting car, instructing his driver to take him home. But as the city lights streaked by, he didn't see them. All his senses were pinned on the memory of holding Caleb and Callie's tiny hands, on how Grace's voice had trembled when she said she wanted them to know him, and on his own promise to be there, to be a father, no matter what unexpected challenges came next. Tomorrow, breakfast would be the first step. And no matter how complicated things got, no matter how much reorganization of his life he'd have to endure, he was prepared. These children were his chance at something he never knew he wanted so deeply, a family that belonged to him. Morning light filtered through the large bay windows of the boutique hotel's dining area, where guests sipped coffee and nibbled on fresh pastries at small, cozy tables. Even at this early hour, there was a gentle bustle, servers moving gracefully with carafes of orange juice, couples quietly chatting over fruit plates, and a faint hum of conversation beneath soft, instrumental music. Colton paused at the entrance, a bit anxious as he scanned the room. He'd barely slept, constantly replaying the image of Caleb and Callie's curious faces. Now he was about to see them again, this time in the more mundane setting of scrambled eggs and waffles, yet it felt monumental. He spotted Grace seated at a corner table, the twins in booster seats across from her. The subdued early morning crowd provided a semblance of privacy. Grace wore a casual blouse and jeans, her hair swept into a neat ponytail, and despite the simple attire, she radiated the same understated elegance that had first caught his attention years ago. Caleb and Callie were busy coloring on the backs of paper menus, each with an array of crayons. The moment Colton stepped closer, Callie peered up with those big, inquisitive eyes. "Mommy, he's here," she proclaimed, twisting around in her seat as though she had just spotted a celebrity. Grace turned, and the corners of her lips curved into a soft smile. She looked relieved, though perhaps still wary. "Morning," she greeted quietly. "We just got here ourselves." Colton felt an odd tingle of nerves. He'd given countless speeches and closed million-dollar deals, yet walking to that table to greet his own children felt like stepping onto a high wire. "Good morning," he managed. As he slid into the seat next to Grace, he offered a little wave to the twins. "Hey, you two. I've been looking forward to having breakfast with you." Caleb looked at him shyly, half hiding behind a tall glass of milk. "You said you'd tell us a story," he mumbled, clearly remembering Colton's promise from the night before. A surge of warmth bloomed in Colton's chest. "I did say that, didn't I?" He caught Grace's eye. "Maybe after we order I can share something from when I was in the Marines. A short, safe for kids version. Callie's face lit up with excitement. Yes, a soldier story. For a moment, their enthusiasm was enough to dispel any lingering awkwardness. A waitress promptly came by, greeting them with a cheerful smile and pouring coffee for the adults. She offered chocolate milk to the twins, which they accepted with glee. After the waitress took their orders, pancakes for the kids, omelets for Grace and Colton, there was a lull, a moment to breathe, to figure out how to manage the next steps in this new family dynamic. Grace placed her hands on her lap, fidgeting slightly. "You mentioned your schedule was crazy today," she said softly, a statement that was also a question. "Did you really make time for us?" "I rearranged everything," he replied firmly, hoping to communicate just how serious he was. "I let my staff know I'm focusing on personal matters this morning. I have some flexibility for the next couple of days if we need more time to talk." He paused, considering his words carefully. "I don't want to rush into decisions about the kids or us, but I'd like to start setting up, well, something consistent. Maybe I can see them on weekends or help out whenever you need." Grace's posture eased, though there was still tension in her eyes. "That's more than I hoped for. She swallowed, glancing at the twins, who were currently absorbed in their coloring. "I want this to be good for them. They deserve stability. They don't really understand who you are yet, other than what I've told them. That you were a Marine, that you came back from something very difficult, and that you've helped a lot of people since." Caleb perked up, pushing his half-finished drawing toward Colton. "Look, I drew a soldier." In the crayon sketch, a tall figure with a helmet stood beside two smaller figures, a boy and a girl. They were all holding flags. "That's awesome," Colton said, genuinely touched. "Is that me?" The boy nodded vigorously. "Yeah, and that's me and Callie. But you have a helmet. Mommy said you wore those." Colton chuckled, glancing sideways at Grace, who gave a small, knowing smile. He turned back to Caleb. "I wore a helmet to stay safe, yes, and sometimes I used night vision goggles so I could see in the dark and protect people. Would you like me to tell you a story about that?" "Yes!" The twins spoke in excited unison. Colton leaned in, pitching his voice just low enough so as not to disturb other diners. He began narrating a kid-friendly account of a nighttime training exercise on a ship, focusing on the camaraderie, the excitement of seeing the ocean at night, and the funny mishaps that can happen when you stumble around with goggles that make everything look green. He carefully omitted any grim details of real combat, instead emphasizing teamwork and the wonder of traveling to different places. They listened with rapt attention, wide-eyed, as if hearing tales of a faraway land. Even Grace seemed caught up in the story, her face softening. A gentle hush settled over the table as Colton finished with a playful flourish. "And that, my brave explorers, is how we learned that salt water tastes terrible when you accidentally trip in the dark and go overboard." Caleb and Callie giggled, delighted, imagining the comical image. Just then, the waitress arrived with their plates, fresh, fluffy pancakes for the twins and for the adults, steaming omelets and toast. While everyone dug in, the conversation drifted to lighter topics: favorite colors, what games the twins enjoyed, Grace's new job prospects. Apparently, she worked part-time for an event planner while she tried to build a small online business. She mentioned the struggles of balancing childcare with an unpredictable work schedule. Colton listened intently, forming a picture of what Grace's life had been like. She wasn't living lavishly. In fact, from what little she shared, he gathered she'd stretched every dollar to provide for the kids. A quiet pang of guilt hit him again, stirring the realization of how absent he'd been, unknowingly. When breakfast was nearly done, Grace signaled for the check, but Colton shook his head. "Let me take care of it, please," he insisted. "It's the least I can do." She hesitated, then acquiesced with a nod. "Thank you." He turned to the kids. "How about we go for a short walk in the courtyard outside? It's really nice. We can see the fountain." Grace agreed, gathering her purse. Once outside, the hotel's courtyard greeted them with a small but beautifully landscaped area, flowers in neat rows, a stone path leading to a trickling water fountain, and benches under flowering arches. The day was bright, the sky a tranquil blue, but the air carried a hint of crispness. Caleb and Callie broke into a run, chasing each other around the fountain. Grace and Colton strolled behind, side by side. Silence settled between them, but it was comfortable rather than strained. Finally, Grace spoke up quietly. "I kept track of you," she admitted, her eyes on the twins. "I read the articles about your company's success. I heard about your injuries from a friend who still had ties to the military community. Part of me wanted to reach out, but every time I worked up the courage, I saw you in some magazine or news clip looking so complete. Like you'd found your place in this big world and I didn't want to disrupt that." He glanced at her, eyebrows knitting. "I never felt complete. Work kept me busy, sure, but it never filled the gap. And the injuries." He subconsciously rubbed his shoulder, the phantom ache echoing. "They weren't just physical. I tried to bury a lot of the old pain in the job, the next contract, the next big opportunity. I thought that was the path to healing. Now I realize maybe I was just running." They paused near the fountain, where the twins were gleefully dipping their fingers into the water. Grace stood close enough that he caught a hint of her floral shampoo, and it tugged at a distant memory. "Well," she said, "we can't change the past, but maybe we can figure out a way forward." He nodded earnestly. "Yes, let's do that. However complicated it might get, I'd like to support you, financially and otherwise. Not as a handout," he added gently, "but as a partner. The kids are ours. They deserve every opportunity." Grace's expression flickered with a blend of gratitude and wounded pride. "I appreciate that, and I'll do my best to give them stability. I never want them to feel caught in the middle of—" She fell silent as the kids came bounding over, their small hands dripping from the fountain. "Daddy, look!" Callie exclaimed, testing out the new title with a shy smile. She showed him her wet palms, giggling as the water droplets fell onto the stone walkway. Though the single word "daddy" was so simple, it thundered in Colton's heart. A moment ago, he had felt like an outsider, peering in at something he barely understood. But now he sensed, in that quiet courtyard, he was at the threshold of stepping fully into fatherhood. He turned to Grace, eyes shining with humility and wonder. In that silent exchange, they acknowledged that the path ahead was uncharted. There would be hard conversations about custody, about time management, about trust. But for now, the morning sun cast golden light on them, and the gentle rush of the fountain seemed to wash away the regrets. They stood there, the four of them, forming an unplanned family portrait. Two giggling children, a mother who had shouldered the burden of single parenthood, and a father newly aware of the greatest duty he'd ever have. He placed a hand on each twin's head, ruffling their hair gently. "You two want to go see if the hotel has cookies at the desk? I bet they do." At the mention of cookies, both children's eyes sparkled. As they scampered toward the lobby door, Colton followed with Grace at his side. For the first time in years, he felt a sense of belonging that not even his corporate empire or his military honors had ever truly granted. These were his kids. This was his family. And as the morning sunlight warmed him, he felt a surge of conviction. Whatever it took, he would make sure none of them had to face life's battles alone again. Later that afternoon, Colton retreated to the quiet sanctuary of his high-rise condo, perched atop a gleaming building in the heart of the city. Floor-to-ceiling windows offered an expansive view of the skyline, but for once the usual satisfaction he felt upon returning to this luxurious vantage point was muted. His thoughts were consumed by the morning's events and the new reality that had overtaken his life. He'd always prided himself on efficiency, on having each detail of his schedule mapped out, each day allocated to pressing business demands or philanthropic efforts. But today's conversation with Grace seeing his children giggle over a fountain in a tucked-away hotel courtyard, had pulled him into uncharted territory. There was no neat strategic plan for fatherhood, no color-coded chart for how to make up for lost time or navigate two preschoolers who were just now learning to call him Dad. Dropping his keys on the entryway table, he noticed a blinking light on his phone. Messages were piling up. His assistant, a longtime business partner in London, a close friend who was also a retired Marine wanting to meet up. Normally he would dive into returning each call, but the chaos in his mind demanded a pause. Instead, he walked to the living area, where plush gray couches surrounded a coffee table stacked with architectural magazines and a few well-placed decorations. He sank onto the sofa, letting the quiet settle over him. For a moment, the only sound was the muted hum of city traffic 30 floors below. Finally, exhaling, he swiped open the phone notifications. Dan, his assistant, had left a succinct voice message. "Hey boss, just checking if you're still good for that 2 p.m. strategy session tomorrow. Also, the shareholders meeting next week might shift if you need more time. Let me know your schedule, and I'll handle any changes." Colton grunted, pressing the phone to his ear. He dreaded shoving fatherhood onto some non-existent corner of his agenda. Yet as CEO, he was needed practically everywhere all the time. Handling VIP security contracts, forging new partnerships, giving speeches at philanthropic events, the responsibilities wouldn't vanish overnight. But for once, they would have to share space with the responsibilities of fatherhood. He dialed Dan back. After a few rings, his assistant picked up, sounding efficient and alert as always. "Yes, Mr. Walker?" "Dan, I need you to adjust tomorrow's schedule a bit more. I'll still attend the strategy session, but push it to mid-afternoon. I have a personal appointment in the morning." "No problem," Dan replied. "And about next week's meeting with the board? They want clarity on the new international contract. Should I confirm your availability?" Colton thought of the intense negotiations he'd been spearheading for a major overseas security project, one that would require travel if he signed on. Before, it had seemed like just another feather in his company's cap. Now, the idea of hopping on a plane for weeks, leaving behind the chance to bond with two children who barely knew him, filled him with dread. He cleared his throat. "Let's keep it on the calendar for now. I may revise travel plans, but we'll cross that bridge soon." Dan, perceptive as ever, paused. "Everything all right, sir?" Colton hesitated. He valued Dan's loyalty and professionalism. In fact, Dan had been part of his team long enough to notice if something major had shifted. "I'm fine, Dan, thanks. Just some new developments in my personal life. I appreciate your flexibility." "No worries," Dan said politely. "I'll handle it." After hanging up, Colton set the phone aside and pinched the bridge of his nose. He could practically feel the tectonic plates of his life shifting, forging new terrain. The man who'd soared so quickly from wounded veteran to corporate powerhouse was now grappling with a question that overshadowed all others: how to be a father. A memory from that morning flashed through his mind: Callie's delight when she dipped her hands in the fountain, Caleb's quiet pride when showing off his soldier drawing. A faint smile crossed Colton's lips. He wanted more of that: the innocence, the genuine excitement, the profound feeling of belonging. His thoughts drifted to Grace. How her voice had trembled with vulnerability, how she'd remained so poised despite revealing such a life-altering secret. They'd parted with a promise to keep communicating, but beyond that, no specifics about who would pick up the twins from preschool, where did they even go to preschool, or how weekends might be shared. The practicalities would come. For now, he felt an urgency to let Grace and the kids know they mattered more than any business meeting could. On impulse, he grabbed his phone again, scrolling to Grace's number. He'd texted her a single time after their goodbyes. "Let me know you got back safe." She'd replied with a simple, "We're home, all good, kids napping, talk soon." Before he could overthink it, he tapped out a new message. "Just checking in. Still can't believe how quickly life changed in 24 hours. Thinking of you and the kids. Let me know if you need anything. Groceries, errands, maybe dinner soon? He stared at the words, a surge of nerves fluttering in his stomach, as if he were an awkward teenager again. Then, hitting send, he set the phone down. The question of dinner with them felt both intimate and mundane, the kind of normal family activity he'd craved without even realizing it. While waiting, without fully admitting he was waiting, for Grace's response, he drifted into the open-concept kitchen to fix a sandwich. The stark black marble counters, the gleaming chrome appliances, everything felt sterile, like a showpiece rather than a warm home. He wondered if the twins might like to visit. They'd probably think the view from the windows was exciting, but he also worried that it lacked the comforting chaos a home with children should have. No crayons, no storybooks, no stuffed animals, just sleek lines and adult decor. His mind wandered to the question of what kind of father he'd be. Protective, certainly. His entire career had been about protection, from the Marines to private security. But kids needed more than that. They needed patience and humor, bedtime stories, and homemade pancakes on Saturdays. They needed someone willing to drop important tasks to attend a school recital or help with a last-minute science project. This was a brand new mission, one that demanded a heart as much as strategy. He carried his simple lunch to the living room, flipping on the TV news for background noise. But every headline, economics, global conflicts, high-profile interviews, felt irrelevant. All he could think was how drastically perspective shifts once you realize there are two little souls counting on you. He'd faced snipers, braved deserts, built a multi-million-dollar enterprise, and yet parenthood loomed as the greatest challenge of them all. His phone chimed. A text from Grace. "Hi, we're up from nap time. Kids want to play outside. Maybe tomorrow we can meet for dinner? I'd like them to spend more time with you if you're free." Colton's chest eased with relief. "If you're free," the words sounded so unassuming, yet to him they were a lifeline. He responded quickly, "Tomorrow works. Name a time and place. I'll be there." Her reply came seconds later. 6 p.m.? There's a family-friendly cafe near my apartment. Nothing fancy, but the kids love it. We can talk about next steps. He set the phone on the table, a smile tugging at his lips. Even the simplest plan, dinner at a casual cafe, felt monumental. For a second, he let himself envision the four of them in a booth. The twins probably scribbling on kids' menus, Grace maybe telling him about her day. It sounded so normal, like a life he never imagined but suddenly wanted with everything in him. A persistent beep from his phone reminded him of the hundreds of unread emails piling up in his business account. Sighing, he scrolled through them. There were proposals and contracts, scheduling briefs from managers, press interview requests, philanthropic invites, all urgent, all wanting an immediate response. But now, his definition of urgent had changed. Sure, business was important. He had employees depending on the company's success, clients trusting him for their safety. Yet none of it outweighed the little boy and girl who had looked up at him that morning, fascinated and hopeful. Another memory surfaced. The charity ball just the night before, when he'd spontaneously brought Grace and the twins into the spotlight, eliciting applause and curious stares. He recalled the ripple of surprise through the crowd, the hush that had fallen when he introduced Caleb and Callie. Maybe that had been impulsive, but something in his heart told him he needed the world to see them, to signal, even to himself, that he was stepping into fatherhood. No more hiding. Wiping away the remnants of his sandwich crumbs, he made a decision. He opened his laptop and composed an email to his executive leadership team. Subject: Personal Update and Adjusted Availability Team. I hope this finds you well. I need to inform you of some personal changes in my life that will require me to restructure my availability temporarily. Effective immediately, I'll be taking more flexible hours to address a family situation. I will still be accessible for critical issues, but my schedule may need shifting on short notice. Please coordinate with Dan for any urgent matters. I trust each of you to continue your excellent work in our projects and client engagements. Thank you for your understanding. Best, Colton Walker, CEO and founder. He read it twice, his finger hovering over the send button. This was the first step in revealing to his inner circle that life as they knew it, his unstoppable presence at the helm, would shift. Though no specifics were mentioned, he imagined rumors might swirl, but it had to be done. He would not let fatherhood be squeezed into the margins of his day. He clicked send, feeling a rush of relief and a twinge of apprehension. With that email, he'd quietly declared that there was a new center of gravity in his life, and it wasn't just the corporate mission anymore. Evening shadows began to stretch across the cityscape outside. Soon, the neon glow of buildings lit up the windows. Typically, Colton might have changed into gym clothes and headed to the private fitness center on the 10th floor, or pored over financial statements until midnight. But tonight, he felt content to settle in with a book and let his mind wander to the possibilities that lay ahead. Yes, tomorrow night he would have dinner with Grace and the kids. Just a small, simple step, but an important one. Their first dinner together as something approximating a family. Maybe they'd chat about how the twins liked preschool, or see if they had a favorite cartoon, or even discuss whether they wanted him to read them a bedtime story. He glanced around the immaculate condo once more, picturing how it might look with children's laughter echoing through the hall, with scattered toys and art projects pinned to the fridge. It was a surreal thought, but in his heart, a sense of calm determination emerged. He would build that environment for them, make space for bedtime stories, for small joys, for fatherhood in every sense. Tomorrow could not come fast enough. The next evening, as twilight draped over the city streets, Colton found himself standing outside a modest, family-friendly cafe nestled in a quiet neighborhood. The neon sign above the door flickered cheerily. The Olive Tree Cafe. It was the sort of place with checkered tablecloths and the smell of homemade soup drifting out whenever someone opened the door. He took a moment to gather himself, his reflection visible in the dark window. Tall, shoulders still carrying that hint of military posture, but dressed more casually than his usual tailored suits. Tonight he wore dark jeans and a navy button-down, aiming for approachable rather than imposing. In his breast pocket, he'd slipped a small coloring book and crayons, something spontaneous he'd bought earlier that day, a token he hoped the twins might enjoy. The day had been busy, of course, endless calls, rescheduled meetings, the usual swirl of corporate responsibilities, but all of it had paled next to the nerves and excitement building in him at the thought of this dinner. 1,000 questions danced in his mind. Would Grace be comfortable? Would the kids warm up to him more? Would it all feel natural or painfully awkward? He stepped inside, scanning the rows of booths and tables. Warm yellow lighting cast a gentle glow on the diners, many of whom were families enjoying a midweek meal. A chalkboard near the register listed the day's specials: tomato bisque, grilled cheese, and something called Grandma's Pot Pie. The air carried the comforting aroma of freshly baked bread. He quickly spotted Grace, Caleb, and Callie seated in a corner booth, beside a window that offered a view of the dimly lit street. The twins looked engrossed in something on the table, little figurines or small toys, perhaps. Grace had her back to the entrance, and she was wearing a simple sweater that complemented her serene demeanor. He noticed how she gently leaned forward to listen to Caleb, who was animatedly telling her something. Stepping closer, Colton cleared his throat. "Hey, everyone," he said softly, and Grace turned. A quick smile lit her features, a mixture of relief and welcome. The twins' heads popped up, 4 bright eyes locking onto him. "Daddy," Callie said, the word tumbling out as though she'd practiced it all day. Caleb glanced at his sister, and then echoed her with a more cautious, "Daddy." Colton's heart did a little flip at hearing that title again. He approached the booth, feeling a wave of affection and responsibility. "You saved me a seat?" he teased gently. Grace slid over, allowing him space on her side, while the twins sat on the opposite bench. "We just arrived," she explained. "We haven't even ordered drinks yet. Figured we'd wait for you." "Thanks," Colton said. He settled beside her, close enough to catch the faint scent of vanilla from her hair. His eyes fell on the table where two little dinosaur figurines stood guard over a pile of kids' menu crayons. Caleb had apparently been marching them around the sugar packets moments before. "How are you two doing?" Colton directed the question to the children. "Find any new adventures today?" Caleb shrugged, fiddling with the brontosaurus's tail. "We went to the park. Callie got sand in her shoe." Callie giggled. "And in my socks." Grace smiled, explaining, "We spent some time at a playground near our apartment. They always come back covered in half the sandbox." Colton chuckled. "Sounds like a sign of a good day. I brought something." He gingerly pulled the small coloring book and crayon set from his pocket, placing it on the table in front of them. The front featured cartoon animals and bright primary colors. "I wasn't sure what you liked, but maybe you'd enjoy this?" Callie's eyes lit up and she reached eagerly. Caleb, though quieter, looked intrigued as well. "Thank you," she exclaimed. Her small voice carried an earnest gratitude that made Colton's chest tighten with emotion. Grace's gaze flicked to him, appreciation evident. "That's thoughtful. They love coloring." A waitress arrived just then, smiling at the table full of children's excitement. She took their orders: milk for the twins, water for Grace, and a soda for Colton. As for food, the twins clamored for macaroni and cheese while Grace opted for the soup, and Colton picked a grilled chicken sandwich. When the waitress left, the four of them fell into a lull that was simultaneously comfortable and tinged with the newness of the situation. Grace asked how Colton's day had gone, and he gave a brief overview, leaving out the details of high-stakes negotiations and security protocols, focusing more on the fact that he'd managed to find time to buy crayons. Throughout it all, the twins occasionally burst into the conversation with the kind of random exuberance only children can muster. Caleb showed off his dinosaur's battle with a T-Rex drawn on his new coloring page, while Callie proudly demonstrated how she could color inside the lines. It struck Colton that, for the first time in his adult life, he felt like he was living in a simple family moment. No cameras, no stage, no business suits, just a dad with his kids, laughing about crayons and dino fights. At one point, Grace touched his arm lightly to get his attention. "I wanted to say thank you for adjusting your schedule. I know, your time is valuable, and I'm sure this is a big shift." He placed his hand over hers. "It's worth it. They're worth it. I just want you to know I'm in this for the long haul. We still have a lot to figure out, but I'm here." Her eyes glimmered and she nodded, lips forming a grateful smile. "Me too." Just then, the food arrived, and soon the twins were too busy blowing on hot macaroni or dropping tiny bits of bread into their soup. Colton helped Caleb get some ketchup for a side of fries, earning a giggle from the boy when the bottle made that characteristic squirt sound. "Daddy, can we go to your big house?" Callie asked at one point rather suddenly. Grace stiffened slightly, but she watched, curious, as Colton responded. "My condo, you mean? Sure, I'd love to have you both over someday. It's up very high, and you can see the whole city out the windows." "Cool," Caleb said, bouncing in his seat. "Maybe we can arrange that soon," Grace interjected carefully. "If Colton's okay with it, we'll talk about schedules." Colton recognized the protective note in her voice. She wanted to be sure the kids felt safe, that this wouldn't be a fleeting promise. He nodded. "Yes, definitely. Whenever you're comfortable." As dinner wound down, the twins began to fidget, done with their meals but still full of energy. Colton offered to take them up to the front counter, where a display of cookies and small pastries glistened under the cafe lights. Grace stayed behind to handle the bill, waving off Colton's attempt to pay and insisting she had it covered this time. He didn't argue. It felt important to let her maintain her independence. At the counter, Caleb and Callie each picked out a cookie, chocolate chip for him, sugar sprinkled for her. Colton noticed they kept glancing up at him as if still uncertain if this was truly their father. He tried to project warmth and assurance, ruffling their hair gently and answering their random questions. "Yes, I do like cookies. Yes, we can open the door with that handle. No, I don't know if they have dinosaur cupcakes here." Finally, Grace joined them, receipts in hand, and they all stepped out into the crisp night air. Streetlights illuminated the quiet block, and a slight breeze made the children draw closer for warmth. Colton instinctively reached out, offering Caleb and Callie each a hand to hold. They accepted, and the sensation of those small, trusting fingers slipping into his own gave him a jolt of both happiness and a protective urge. They strolled a short distance, just to the end of the block. Caleb yawned, and Callie began to lag behind, cookie crumbs clutched in her hand. Clearly, bedtime was nearing. Grace eventually stopped outside her car, which was parked on the street. "This was nice," she said softly, unlocking the doors. "Thanks for coming. I think the twins really liked it." "Me too. More than you know," Colton said, crouching to be at eye level with the kids. "So next time we'll do that visit to my place, huh?" Caleb looked at Callie, then nodded. "Yeah." Grace glanced between them. "We'll coordinate soon. They have preschool classes in the mornings and I usually work afternoons, but maybe one weekend day?" "Sounds good," Colton agreed, standing up. The city lights glinted off the car's windshield, bathing them in a gentle glow. It was a simple arrangement, yet for him it felt like a promise of something bigger, a consistent presence in their world. She opened the back door for the kids, helping them climb into booster seats. Before Colton could say goodbye, Callie leaned out, arms extended. He realized with a start that she wanted a hug. Heart pounding, he obliged, wrapping his arms around her small frame carefully so as not to jostle her. Then Caleb gave a quick, awkward hug, too, as if not wanting to be left out. "Bye, Daddy," Callie said, her eyes shining. "We can see your tall house soon?" "You bet." He smiled, swallowing the lump in his throat. "Bye, buddy," he added to Caleb, who waved solemnly like a little soldier. After Grace shut the car doors, she and Colton stood face to face for a moment, the hush of the street and distant hum of traffic surrounding them. "Thank you," she repeated. "I know I keep saying that, but really thank you for stepping up, for being here." He saw the mix of gratitude and vulnerability in her gaze. "I'm only sorry it took me so long to know." She shook her head. "We'll figure it out, one step at a time." He nodded, and with a final glance at the twins in the back seat, he watched as Grace drove away, the car's taillights vanishing into the night. A profound sense of longing and contentment washed over him simultaneously, longing for the day he'd say goodnight to his kids under the same roof, contentment in knowing that these first steps had been taken. With hands in his pockets, Colton strolled back toward his own car. The city felt different somehow, more alive, more personal, as though each distant headlight might be another father or mother heading home. He realized that for the first time in years, he felt excited to return to his condo, no longer just the place where he slept and worked, but a space that he was preparing to fill with the presence of his children. Even as responsibilities loomed, shareholder meetings, security deals, philanthropic obligations, he recognized a deeper calling. Those small voices calling him Daddy had reset his compass. And as he drove home under the soft glow of street lamps, he did so with renewed purpose, eager to plan for a weekend that might bring the twins into his world again. Tomorrow, he'd continue balancing the precarious scales of business and fatherhood. But tonight, he let himself savor the victory of a simple family dinner, of hearing his children laugh over crayons and silly dinosaur battles, of hugging them goodnight. And for a man who had once believed combat was the ultimate test of courage, he now understood a more delicate truth, that opening his heart to the unconditional love of two little kids would demand every ounce of bravery he possessed. 2 days later, Colton found himself standing in the center of his high-rise condo's living room, glancing around with fresh eyes. The space was immaculate, sleek and sophisticated. Marble floors, minimalist decor, curated art on the walls. He'd always liked how it felt like a personal retreat above the bustling city. But now, as he imagined two 4-year-olds running around, this stark environment seemed suddenly fragile and uninviting. Where would they play? Where would he store their toys? What if they scuffed the walls or spilled juice on the suede couch? Part of him felt an edge of panic, but an even stronger part wanted those small signs of chaos. He had spent years with every item in its precise place, no disruptions to routine except for business emergencies. Now he was willingly opening his door and his life to the sweet mayhem of children. He inhaled, letting that realization settle. The day before, he and Grace had spoken on the phone to finalize the weekend plans. She suggested they bring the twins over to his condo for the first time. Grace would drive them there late Saturday morning, and they'd spend a few hours together. Maybe they'd go out to the little park behind his building or order pizza if the kids got hungry. Colton had jumped at the chance, offering to pick them up himself, but Grace preferred to have her own car. He understood. It was a safeguard, an escape hatch if things got tense or if the kids got too tired. They'd parted the call with polite optimism, though beneath the surface, Colton sensed a million unspoken worries from Grace, and at least as many from himself, now that Saturday morning had arrived. Colton had woken early, rummaging through closets to see if he had anything that might entertain 4-year-olds. The answer was obvious. No. Besides the coloring book and crayons, there was little else. So he'd quickly gone out to a local toy store, returning with a small bag of stuffed animals, some wooden blocks, and a child-friendly puzzle. It wasn't much, but it was a start. He glanced at his watch. The kids would be here soon. Adrenaline fluttered in his stomach like preparing for an important negotiation, yet this felt far more personal than any deal. He tried to imagine how the twins would see his home, a giant penthouse in the sky, full of glass and sharp corners. He hoped they wouldn't be uncomfortable or bored. A buzzing sound from the security console announced someone's arrival. Heart thumping, he pressed the intercom. Grace's soft voice came through, confirming they were in the lobby. He buzzed them up. Then he smoothed his shirt, trying not to overthink everything. Moments later, the elevator doors slid open, and Grace stepped out, each child clutching one of her hands. She wore a casual button-down shirt and jeans, her hair neatly pinned back. Caleb and Callie looked wide-eyed, craning their necks at the soaring ceiling and polished floors. They wore little sneakers and light jackets, perfect for a day of exploring. "Hey," Colton greeted, forcing his voice to stay calm. "Welcome." Grace offered a polite smile, though he could see a flicker of nerves in her eyes. "Thanks for having us." She gently nudged the twins forward. "Go say hi." "Hi, Daddy," Callie said, stepping close to him. Caleb stuck by Grace's side, scanning the surroundings with guarded curiosity. Colton knelt to greet them at eye level. "Hey there, did you see the view coming up in the elevator?" Callie nodded vigorously. "It was really high. I thought we were flying." Caleb peeked past Colton into the condo. "Is this where you live?" he asked, sounding equal parts wonder and shyness. "It is. Come on in," Colton said, stepping aside so they could walk through the foyer and into the main living area. He offered Grace a gentle nod, hoping to convey both gratitude and reassurance. The twins wandered in, gazing at the large windows that framed the skyline like a panoramic painting. The city stretched out for miles below, with cars looking like tiny specks moving along the roads. Even Grace paused, clearly impressed. "Wow," she murmured. "I've seen pictures in magazines of places like this, but never actually been inside one." Colton swallowed a flare of self-consciousness. He knew his place was extravagant. He'd poured his earnings into a home that provided safety, privacy, and a sense of triumph over his past. "Let me show you around," he offered. He led them down a short hallway to a spare room he'd hastily tried to convert into a play area, placing the new blocks and puzzle on a low table. There was a small couch he'd pulled from another area, and he'd laid out a soft rug. The transformation was minimal, but it was the best he could do on short notice. Callie let out a little squeal of delight when she saw the stuffed animals. Caleb gravitated to the wooden blocks, testing how tall he could stack them. Grace observed, arms folded, her expression softening. "This is nice," she said. "Thank you for putting in so much effort." "It's not much yet," he admitted, "but if they like visiting here, I'd be happy to make it more kid-friendly." Callie picked up a small bunny plush, hugging it to her chest. "I like this one," she announced. Grace managed to smile. "She's big on stuffed animals." Colton grinned. "She can keep that if she wants." Then, glancing at Caleb, who was balancing a block precariously on top of another, he asked, "What about you, buddy? You a puzzle kind of kid, or do you like building tall towers?" Caleb shrugged, not meeting his eyes. "I like dinosaurs best," he admitted. "Dinosaurs, right?" Colton said, remembering the cafe conversation. "We'll have to get some dino stuff for next time." There was a subtle shift at the mention of next time. Grace noticed it too, a small hint of permanency. She angled her head, letting her ponytail slip to the side. "Speaking of which, maybe we should talk about a schedule at some point," she said gently. "I know you're busy, but the twins will start kindergarten soon. It might be good to figure out when you can spend time with them regularly." Colton nodded, though a pit of anxiety opened in his chest. His schedule was insane. Board meetings, security briefings, business travel, but he was determined to make it work. "Absolutely. We can talk after we let them explore a bit. Then maybe order pizza for lunch?" The mere mention of pizza made the twins perk up. "Pepperoni!" they cried in unison, eyes bright with excitement. "That's a yes, then," Grace remarked with amusement. For a while, the twins busied themselves with their new toys. Colton guided them to the window, lifting them carefully so they could get a better view of the cityscape. Their delighted exclamations echoed in the high-ceilinged living area. Grace snapped a few photos on her phone, capturing the moment. Colton stood behind them, feeling a surge of warmth at seeing his children so enthralled. As the morning wore on, they ended up in the kitchen. Colton poured glasses of water, and Grace helped gather plates and napkins for the pizza that would soon arrive. The twins zoomed around the open space, discovering every corner. Callie found a small decorative sculpture on the coffee table and was intrigued by its shape. Caleb discovered the stereo system remote and accidentally turned on a jazz station, filling the condo with a soft saxophone melody. After a bit of confusion, Colton had never ordered from the local pizza place, so he had to look it up online. The delivery finally arrived. They set the boxes on the dining table, but the kids insisted on an indoor picnic in their new playroom, so Colton carried the plates there. He laid them out on the rug, while the twins giggled over how different it was to eat pizza on the floor. Between bites, Grace broached the subject of scheduling again. "So, kindergarten starts in a few weeks," she began. "Right now, they have half-day preschool 3 days a week. I usually pick them up on my lunch break, then a friend babysits them while I work in the afternoon." Colton nodded, wiping a stray piece of pepperoni from the rug. "I can probably arrange time at least one evening a week, pick them up from preschool if you want, and alternate weekends maybe. Of course, the details might fluctuate when I have to travel, but I'll do my best to keep it consistent." Grace looked relieved. "That's a good start. I appreciate your honesty. I just don't want them disappointed if you're gone for weeks at a time." He exhaled, thinking of the new international contracts and how he was known for personally overseeing high-profile security deals. "I may delegate more," he said quietly. "Hire more staff. It's about time I eased up on traveling anyway. I have a strong team. Maybe I don't need to be on the ground for every deal." She searched his gaze, and he recognized the skepticism. Was he really willing to scale back for them? "That sounds big," she murmured. He pressed his lips together. They're worth it, Grace. All three of you are. Her eyes grew misty, but she blinked and nodded. Well, if you do that, I'll do my part too. We'll figure out co-parenting, child support, all of it, without lawyers if possible. I'd prefer that, Colton said, noticing how Caleb was edging closer, as if sensing a serious talk. He softened his voice, beckoning the boy over. Hey, bud, want to help me build a bigger tower with those blocks? Together they assembled a precarious stack, which Callie gleefully knocked over at the last second. The kids' laughter echoed in the high ceilings, and Grace sat nearby, nibbling on a slice of pizza and watching the scene unfold with a thoughtful expression. Once the pizza was finished, they ventured downstairs to the building's private courtyard. It was a secure area with manicured lawns, a small fountain, and benches. The twins scampered around, chasing each other and squealing when they discovered a friendly cat wandering the bushes. Grace chatted with Colton quietly, detailing the twins' everyday habits, who liked apple juice, who preferred orange, which bedtime stories they never got tired of. Colton soaked it all in, determined to memorize each detail. It felt like gleaning essential intel for the most important operation of his life. After a while, the children began to tire. Caleb eventually plopped onto a bench, resting his head on Grace's arm. Callie declared she was super sleepy, her earlier excitement replaced by droopy eyes and slow steps. I think it's time we go home, Grace said gently, brushing hair from Callie's face. Nap time, definitely. Colton's heart squeezed with disappointment but also contentment. This was real, normal family stuff. A day of fun that ended when the kids needed rest. Nothing dramatic or showy, just a sweet routine he'd never experienced with them before. All right, he agreed, helping gather the few items the twins had brought down. They rode the elevator back up so Grace could get her purse and coats from the condo. The twins yawned, leaning against her legs. Once they were ready to leave, Colton walked them to the elevator, hesitating in the hallway as the doors slid open. Callie rubbed her eyes. Bye-bye, Daddy, she whispered. I liked your house. Caleb gave a shy half-wave. Me too, he mumbled, still sleepy. Colton crouched, giving them each a gentle hug. Thanks for coming over. We'll do it again soon, okay? Maybe next time I'll have dinosaur toys, he promised, glancing at Caleb. Grace stepped into the elevator, her expression a mixture of gratitude and fatigue. Thank you for today. The kids had a lot of fun. He swallowed the swell of emotion. Me too, he said softly. Text me when you get home safe. She nodded, and the elevator doors closed, leaving Colton standing alone in the hallway. The hush of the moment pressed in on him. Without fanfare, the first official visit had ended, a normal everyday slice of family life, yet for him it felt monumental. Returning to his condo, he found the remnants of the day scattered about, half-empty juice cups, a few blocks forgotten in the corner, tiny smudges of sauce on the napkins. He felt a pang of sadness at their absence, but also a deep, reassuring warmth. They had been here. They had laughed and played in these very rooms. They were no longer distant names or uncertain responsibilities. They were flesh and blood, small hands that clung to him, bright voices that called him Daddy. Exhaling slowly, he began tidying up. As he placed each block back into the box, he reflected on how different his life now felt from the silent solitude he'd known. And for perhaps the first time ever, the hush of this condo seemed like an invitation rather than an escape. A blank canvas he could fill with the presence of his children. The following week ushered in a new normal, or at least the beginnings of one. Every couple of days, Colton found a moment between meetings or late at night to call Grace and speak briefly with the twins. The first few calls were tentative. Caleb and Callie took a while to warm up to the idea of talking into a phone. Still, each chat was precious, filled with giggles and small updates about preschool art projects or funny events at the playground. Sometimes they'd even demand Colton make funny voices or tell a quick marine story before bedtime. On the professional front, changes were brewing. Colton had instructed Dan to delegate more of his upcoming travel duties to trusted managers. At first, there was some confusion. Colleagues had come to rely on Colton's personal presence at every major pitch or contract negotiation, but after a few curt directives from the boss, the team adjusted. The chatter within the company suggested that Mr. Walker was dealing with something personal, but the respect and loyalty he'd earned kept the rumor mill mostly subdued. One drizzly Thursday afternoon, Colton found himself in a boardroom preparing for a pivotal virtual meeting with a top-tier international client. Where he normally would have flown out to meet them in person, this time he'd insisted on a video conference. The screens blinked to life around him, showing faces from 3 different time zones. Dan handed him a stack of briefing documents. "Here's the info you wanted," he said quietly. "You sure you don't want me to close the door?" Colton glanced at the floor-to-ceiling windows, the city skyline blurred by rain. "No, it's fine. I'll keep it open." He appreciated the subtle show of support, but he wasn't hiding. If anything, he was owning this new direction. He was still the CEO, still in control, just not the perpetual workhorse who lived in airports. The meeting began, voices filtering in through multiple speakers, each representative introducing themselves. Negotiations proceeded smoothly at first, with Colton explaining how his security firm could fulfill the client's needs. But halfway through, a new stipulation arose, requiring an on-site evaluation for risk assessment. The client wanted Colton personally. His military expertise was part of the deal. A muscle ticked in his jaw. He was torn. The old Colton would have jumped on a plane without hesitation. But now that would mean being away from the twins at a time when they were finally starting to bond with him. He inhaled. "I understand your desire for my personal oversight," he said into the mic, maintaining a polite but firm tone. "However, I've recently decided to scale back direct travel. I have a specialized team of former military officers, some of whom have equivalent or greater field experience than me, who will provide full on-site assessments. I'll supervise remotely, review all data, and remain accessible 24/7. I assure you, the caliber of their expertise meets or exceeds any single individual's." There was a pause on the other end. A flicker of skepticism crossed the client's faces. Finally, the lead executive leaned forward. "Mr. Walker, we specifically requested you for your background and reputation. Are you saying you can't fulfill that personally?" Colton felt the pressure, but he stayed composed. "I'm saying my company's strength is built on a team approach. If a personal presence is a non-negotiable point, we can re-examine the scope, but we'll deliver the same top-tier service. My name is on the company, and I stand by its results." Another tense pause, and then the executive gave a tight nod. "We'll discuss it with our board." The meeting concluded shortly after, leaving the outcome uncertain. As the video feed disconnected, Colton released a breath he didn't realize he'd been holding. Dan hovered near the door, watching with concern. "Boss?" he asked gently. "I'm fine," Colton said, rubbing the back of his neck. I'm committed to not missing these early days with my kids. If that loses us some contracts, then so be it." Dan nodded respectfully. "Understood. Let me know if you need any adjustments to strategy or additional staff. We'll find a way." After the adrenaline settled, Colton gathered his things and left the boardroom. He made his way down the corridor to his private office, a large glass-walled space overlooking the city. There he settled behind his desk, but instead of diving into emails, he found himself scrolling through photos on his phone. Shots of Caleb and Callie at his condo, beaming at the camera with cheese pizza grins and messy hands. A pang of longing struck him. He realized he hadn't seen them in a few days. He tapped out a quick text to Grace. "Hey, any chance I can stop by the park after work to see the twins for an hour? If schedules allow. If not, maybe tomorrow." Her reply came within minutes. "Sure. We'll be at their usual playground near the apartment around 5 p.m. You're welcome to join." Relief washed over him. He wrapped up a few pressing tasks, delegated the rest to Dan, and by 4:30, he was heading out the door. The drizzle had stopped, leaving the streets damp and gleaming in the late afternoon sun. He took his own car, enjoying the sense of freedom and purpose that came with defying his old habits. He didn't race back to the office or plan for a late-night session. He was going to the park to be with his kids. He arrived to find a cozy neighborhood square where a modest playground occupied the center. The grass was a little soggy, but children still raced around the slides and swings, their parents or caregivers chatting on benches. No one recognized him as some powerful CEO. He blended into the casual scene wearing jeans and a jacket. Spotting Grace and the twins near the slides, he made his way over. Caleb hung from monkey bars looking unsure whether to drop, while Callie was busy digging a little moat in the wet sand. Grace stood guard, smiling at their antics. At the sound of footsteps, she turned. "Hey," she greeted quietly, warmth in her eyes. "They'll be thrilled you made it." Caleb, hearing Colton's voice, released the bar and landed with a thud in the soft wood chips. He stumbled, then straightened, looking proud of himself. "Daddy, did you see that?" Colton grinned. "Sure did. That was brave," he said, ruffling his son's hair. Then he crouched near Callie, who beamed up at him. "Working on a masterpiece?" he teased, gesturing at her pile of sand. She nodded eagerly. "It's a castle. I need water for the moat." He surveyed the play area, spotting a little water pump near the side for rinsing hands. "I can get some. Got a bucket or something?" Grace laughed. "We didn't bring one, but we can improvise. Maybe use that empty cup from her juice box if you like." Colton helped gather water, carefully bringing it to Callie's construction site. The little girl squealed in delight as the water pooled around her fortress of sand. Meanwhile, Caleb decided to show off his climbing skills on the small rock wall, demanding that Colton watch every step. Half an hour passed in a blur of simple joys, helping them navigate the playground equipment, pushing Callie on the swing, applauding Caleb's attempts at the monkey bars. Grace occasionally chimed in with gentle reminders to play nice or slow down. Amid the laughter, Colton felt a wave of gratitude for how easily the twins had started to accept him. When the clouds overhead thickened, threatening another shower, Grace gathered the kids. "We'd better head home for dinner soon. Thanks for coming," she told Colton with a soft smile. "Glad I could," he replied, brushing damp sand from his hands. "I'll walk you to your car." They strolled toward the parking lot, Callie jumping over puddles while Caleb clung to Grace's side, clearly winding down. As they reached the car, Grace buckled the children in. Colton used the moment to quietly address her. "Grace, this is really good. I hope you know how much I appreciate your openness," he said, lowering his voice so the kids wouldn't overhear. "I know I'm coming in late, and it's not lost on me that you've raised them on your own all these years." She nodded, her gaze shifting between him and the twins in the back seat. "Honestly, it's been a huge help to have you around. I'm still cautious. But the kids adore you, and seeing them with you makes it hard not to feel hopeful." He reached out, gently brushing her forearm. "I won't let them down. Or you." A faint blush colored her cheeks. Then, as if noticing the time, she cleared her throat. "Well, I better get these two home. We'll see you soon?" "How about Saturday again?" he suggested. "Maybe they can come by the condo and we can visit that big toy store downtown if you're comfortable with that." She considered. "Sounds fun. Let's plan for around noon. I'll text to confirm." He grinned, stepping back. "Perfect. Drive safe." She got into the car. The twins waved from the back, and he waved back, letting out a contented sigh as they pulled away. Standing there, hands in his pockets, Colton watched the taillights blend into traffic. His phone buzzed. It was a message from Dan, reminding him about a next-day briefing. But at that moment, he felt neither rushed nor burdened. He felt simply like a father who'd managed to slip away from the pressures of corporate life to catch a glimpse of the most important adventure he'd ever undertake. With renewed determination, he strolled to his own car, mentally drafting an email to his executive team. He'd confirm the briefing, handle whatever crisis had popped up, and delegate more if needed. Because tomorrow, he'd do it all again, and come Saturday, nothing would stop him from taking his twins to that toy store, come hell or high water. Colton's Saturday plan with the twins went off like a dream, at first. Shortly before noon, Grace pulled into the circular drive of his high-rise, and the twins bolted out of the car, brimming with excitement. The promise of a trip to the biggest toy store ever had them practically vibrating. They shot through the building's lobby into the private elevator, peppering Colton with questions about how tall his building was, or whether they'd see helicopters flying by the windows. Grace hung back slightly, letting the kids enjoy their father's enthusiasm. She wore a light jacket, looking relaxed, yet focused on the children's safety, especially in these unfamiliar surroundings. Colton caught the subtle way her gaze flicked between the twins and the glass elevator walls, as though ensuring no one got too close. A part of him felt grateful for her vigilance. He realized she'd been their sole protector all these years, but he also felt a pang of guilt, wishing he'd been around to share in that role before now. They settled briefly in Colton's condo, giving the twins time to gulp down some juice boxes and marvel at the cityscape. The plan was to spend just a few minutes there, then drive downtown to the large toy store. The morning sun flooded through the tall windows, illuminating the new stash of toys Colton had started collecting for them. Caleb gravitated to a plastic dinosaur set, while Callie discovered a sparkly princess wand. Their gleeful exclamations reassured Colton that all the time and money spent was worth it. Grace took a seat on the sofa, smiling softly as she watched them. "They really love coming here," she admitted. "You're putting in so much effort, Colton. I want you to know it means a lot." He sank onto the sofa next to her, aware of the cozy warmth in the air. "I'm trying," he said quietly, glancing at the twins as they admired the dinosaur figurines. "I hope I'm not overdoing it with all these new toys. I just want them to feel at home." She reached out, giving his hand a gentle squeeze. "You're doing great," she replied. "They're happy. That's what matters." For a second, they lingered in a shared moment of understanding. Then, with the kids chanting about the toy store, they headed back down to Colton's SUV. He helped fasten them into their booster seats, noticing how comfortable he was becoming with these small fatherly tasks, something that just weeks ago he'd never imagined doing. The ride downtown took about 15 minutes. Caleb pressed his nose to the window, pointing out tall buildings. Callie bounced in her seat whenever she saw a billboard with bright colors. Grace fielded their excitement with calm patience, occasionally throwing Colton an amused glance. Soon they reached the toy store, a sprawling two-story establishment with vivid window displays and cartoon murals. Inside, aisles stretched in every direction. Building blocks, dolls, art supplies, action figures, and plush toys. Caleb's eyes went wide at the dinosaur section, while Callie flitted toward a pink unicorn display. "Whoa," Colton murmured, momentarily overwhelmed by the sheer volume of options. "All right, you two, you can pick one favorite toy each, but just one," he added with a grin, remembering Grace's caution not to spoil them with an entire cartful. The children dashed off, squealing, leaving Grace and Colton to follow more sedately. He snagged a shopping basket, anticipating they might find more than just one thing, but Grace gave him a knowing smirk, as if to say, "Don't go overboard." While the twins played with sample items in each aisle, Grace and Colton strolled behind, occasionally locking eyes. They found themselves chatting easily about the twins' teacher who praised Caleb's creativity, about Callie's newfound love of glitter pens. It felt domestic and intimate in a way that made Colton's chest swell with quiet happiness. But just as the day seemed perfectly on track, Colton's phone began buzzing incessantly in his pocket. At first, he ignored it. He'd told Dan he was off the grid for a few hours. Yet the calls kept repeating, one after another. Worried it might be a genuine emergency, he signaled to Grace that he needed to answer. Stepping aside near a display of stuffed bears, he pressed the phone to his ear. "This is Colton," he said in a hushed tone. Sir, it's Dan. The voice was rushed. We've got a crisis. The prospective international client just threatened to pull out of the deal unless you personally fly to their site next week. Our entire team has been on damage control all morning. Colton's shoulders tensed. This was the biggest contract in the pipeline. Losing it would be a blow to both the company's finances and reputation. But hadn't he just told them he was cutting back on travel? Dan, I'm in the middle of something, he said, glancing at the twins squealing over a giant T-Rex figure. Let me call you back later. We'll figure it out. Understood, sir, Dan replied, though his tone carried an undercurrent of urgency. Please keep in mind they gave a hard deadline. They want a personal meeting or they walk. Got it, Colton muttered and disconnected. The brief conversation left his mind buzzing with conflict. He turned back to see Grace smiling at him from across the aisle, but as he approached, she frowned at his troubled expression. Work? She asked softly. Yeah, he admitted, raking a hand through his hair. One of our major clients is insisting on me traveling out of the country. Might be gone a week or two. He didn't miss how Grace's face fell. Oh, she said, trying and failing to hide her disappointment. When? They want it as soon as possible, he replied, trying to keep a lid on his frustration. I told them I'd call back, but it's complicated. She dipped her gaze, nodding. I understand. If you need to go, then we'll adjust. She paused, then forced a small smile. Let's not ruin the day with that. The kids are having a blast. Colton swallowed the impulse to argue that he didn't want to go. Instead, he forced a tight smile and returned to the twins, who had zero awareness of adult problems. Callie was hugging a unicorn plush that sparkled in the store's bright lights, while Caleb was torn between a roaring T-Rex action figure and a more realistic-looking Stegosaurus. Daddy, which one is cooler? Caleb demanded. Colton knelt, examining the dinosaur toys. Tough choice. The T-Rex has big teeth, but the Stegosaurus has those awesome plates on its back. Which do you like more? Caleb considered seriously, then picked the T-Rex. It can roar, he reasoned. Callie stuck with her plush unicorn, hugging it protectively. All right, those are your picks, Colton said. Let's go pay. He pressed a gentle hand on each child's shoulder, ushering them toward the registers. Grace followed, sensing something weighed on his mind. By the time they left the store, arms full of 2 new toys and a few extra small items Colton had slipped in, the children were ecstatic. Yet Colton couldn't fully shake the tension from that phone call. He had promised not to let them down, but the demands of his role were piling up like an avalanche. They drove back to his condo, the twins chatting animatedly about their new toys. He tried to focus on their excitement, but his thoughts kept returning to the ultimatum from that big client. Upon arriving at his building, they all piled out, and soon enough, the kids were once again exploring the lofty living room, roaring at each other with the new T-Rex while the unicorn soared overhead. Meanwhile, Grace and Colton stood aside in the open-concept kitchen, voices low. I can reschedule, he insisted, though the statement sounded hollow even to him. Tell them I can't make it for personal reasons. Grace studied his face. Will that cost you the contract? Probably, he admitted, but I'll figure something else out. The twins are more important. Her brow furrowed. That's sweet, but I know how significant your work is. Maybe we can compromise? Go for a shorter trip or arrange for daily video calls. It's not ideal, but we'll manage. The kids want you in their lives, but they'll understand if you're gone for a bit, as long as they know you're coming back. Colton grimaced, the conflict in his chest growing sharper. I just hate that it has to be this way. I feel like I'm going to miss out on these crucial bonding days. They're still getting used to me. What if they forget me? Her expression softened, and she placed a hand on his arm. They're not going to forget you, Colton. You've made it clear you care. Life happens. You have a big job, and I've always known that. The kids will adjust as long as you stay consistent in other ways. He let out a long breath, absorbing her reassurance. Perhaps she was right. He needed to be realistic. Part of fatherhood would be juggling responsibilities. "All right," he said quietly. "I'll see how short I can make the trip. No more than a week if possible." Grace offered a faint smile. "We'll be here waiting. But for now, let's focus on the rest of the day with them." They rejoined the twins, who were now in the corner playroom, building a fortress of pillows and blocks. For the next couple of hours, Colton stayed present, valiantly pushing the looming business crisis aside. He helped them color, did silly dinosaur hunts around the condo, and even threw a mini tea party with Callie's new unicorn set. Laughter filled the space, and for a time, he managed to forget the weight pressing on him. But in the back of his mind, he knew the clock was ticking. Eventually, Grace pulled him aside again. "They're getting hungry," she said softly. "I was thinking I might take them home soon. Unless you want to do dinner here?" Colton considered the question, glancing at the small watch on his wrist. He had a dreaded follow-up call with Dan in less than an hour, one he had to make to salvage the contract. If he invited them to stay, he'd have to juggle a serious business conversation while they were around. That wouldn't be fair to the twins or to Grace. He brushed a palm across his stubbled jaw. "I think it might be better for me to handle some work calls," he said reluctantly. "I'm sorry. Next time we'll plan a full dinner?" Grace nodded in understanding, though disappointment flickered in her eyes. "Sure, I'll get them ready." A few minutes later, the twins were corralled near the front door. They gave him quick hugs, Caleb pressing the T-Rex toy protectively to his chest, Callie hugging her unicorn with one arm while wrapping the other around his waist. He felt their warmth, their trust, and it nearly undid him. "See you soon, Daddy," Callie murmured, her voice sleepy and content. "Soon," he promised, his throat tight. Grace mouthed a soft goodbye, and he watched them step into the elevator, disappearing behind the sliding doors. The condo fell silent, leaving only the faint hum of the air conditioning. Colton stared at the reflection of the empty hallway, then trudged back into the living room. Toys lay scattered, a half-constructed tower, crayons on the table, a stray dinosaur tail under the coffee table. He wanted nothing more than to keep living in that joyful chaos, but the pressing demands of his position loomed. He exhaled, picking up his phone to dial Dan. The adult world was waiting for him to respond. Meetings, flights, negotiations. A wave of determination rose in him. He could not abandon his responsibilities, but he would not let them overshadow the newfound light in his life. If it meant compressing his schedule to the brink, so be it. If it meant making daily video calls from a hotel room overseas, he would do it. Punching in the number, he steeled himself. "Dan," he said when the line connected, "book me a flight for Tuesday, but make sure it's a short trip. I'm returning in a week maximum, no exceptions." As Dan began listing logistical arrangements, Colton's gaze drifted to the couch where Callie had been sitting, the imprint of her small frame still on the cushion. Resolve hardened in his chest. This trip would be on his terms, not some open-ended absence that left the twins waiting. Because now, everything, every step, every deal, every flight, revolved around the simple truth he'd discovered. Fatherhood came first. Monday arrived in a rush of last-minute preparations. Colton's looming flight meant he had only a day left in the city. The morning brought a swirl of tasks at his office, finalizing contracts, delegating responsibilities, and making sure his leadership team understood he intended to be back within a week, no wiggle room. He'd decided to spend his afternoon with the twins, determined not to squander any opportunity for time together. Grace had agreed to bring them by for lunch at a children's activity center, a bright indoor space filled with slides, ball pits, and mini trampolines. She said the twins loved playing there on rainy days. And though the sun shone brightly that Monday, they decided to meet anyway, giving the kids a chance to burn off energy. By noon, Colton was anxiously exiting his building, ignoring curious looks from employees who saw their famously busy boss heading out midday. He arrived at the center to find it alive with shrieks of laughter, toddlers toddling in every direction, preschoolers flinging themselves down colorful slides. Parents sat at tables, sipping coffee, half distracted as they kept an eye on their children. Colton scanned the crowd until he spotted Grace, waving to him near a corner booth. The twins were already immersed in play. Caleb scrambled up a padded ladder to a small platform, while Callie hopped excitedly in a shallow ball pit. Grace smiled as he approached, a plastic cup of coffee in her hand. "They've been looking forward to seeing you all morning," she said. "I told them you might have to leave town soon, but that you'd still call." He nodded, slipping off his jacket and draping it over a chair. "Yes, my flight's tomorrow," he confessed. "I'll probably be gone a week, maybe less if I can swing it. I was hoping to talk with them about it so they're not confused when I suddenly vanish." Grace's eyes flicked to where the kids were playing. "We'll explain it together," she said softly, empathy in her voice. "They'll be okay. Just make sure you keep your promises. Call them when you say you will." A pang of guilt resonated in Colton's chest. He knew how crucial consistency was, especially after he'd appeared out of nowhere in their lives. "I will," he assured, then turned his head at the sound of squeaky shoes rushing toward him. Callie bounded up, breathless, clutching a small foam ball she'd grabbed from the play area. "Daddy, come play with me in the balls," she pleaded. She pointed eagerly at the ball pit, where several other young kids splashed around in a sea of soft spheres. "Of course," Colton agreed, casting a quick, grateful smile at Grace. He let Callie tug him by the hand into the pit, where the squishy balls rose nearly to his waist. Caleb joined in a moment later, brandishing a foam sword he'd discovered. They spent the next 15 minutes in a whirlwind of laughter, tossing soft spheres at each other and watching Colton attempt to stand upright without slipping on the plastic beneath his feet. Eventually, they moved on to the indoor climbing structures. Colton carefully guided them on rope bridges and miniature slides, amazed by their fearless energy. He found himself forgetting all about meetings and flights. This was a new battlefield, where squeals of joy replaced the roar of business demands. Even Grace joined them at times, laughing as she helped Callie across a wobbly bridge. When they finally regrouped at the corner booth, cheeks flushed, the kids demanded snacks. Grace handed out juice boxes and crackers. Colton slid into the booth, the mild ache in his back reminding him he wasn't as young or flexible as the other parents. Yet the contentment coursing through him was worth every sore muscle. He glanced at Grace, clearing his throat. "We should talk to them about tomorrow," he suggested quietly. She nodded, guiding the twins to face their father. "Hey guys," Colton began gently, trying to keep his tone bright. "I have to go on a short trip for work tomorrow. I'll be gone for a few days, maybe a week, but I'm going to call you every day, okay?" Callie's brows knitted in confusion and she set down her juice box. "Where are you going?" she asked, a hint of worry creeping into her voice. "Somewhere far away," he admitted, resting a hand on hers. "I have to help people do important security stuff, but after I finish I'll come right back and we'll do something fun again, like maybe another trip to the toy store or the park. Would you like that?" Caleb took a moment, seemingly torn between curiosity and uncertainty. "Will you miss my birthday?" he asked suddenly. Grace's eyes widened. She knew Caleb's birthday was still months away, but he was obviously sensitive to the idea of his father missing big milestones. "I won't miss your birthday," Colton vowed. "It's in August, right? I promise I'll be here for that." Caleb looked mildly reassured. Callie, fidgeting with her crackers, still looked bothered. "But you just got here," she mumbled, not quite understanding the concept of business travel. Colton's heart lurched. He shot a glance at Grace, who placed a reassuring hand on Callie's shoulder. "Remember, sweetie, we talked about how Daddy works in a job where sometimes he goes away for a little bit," she said softly. "But he calls us, and he's always thinking about us." Callie sniffed, then nodded, her expression sad but accepting. "Okay," she whispered. Colton exhaled, his chest tight. "I promise I won't be gone too long," he repeated, trying to inject confidence into his tone. "And while I'm away, maybe you can send me pictures of your drawings or the new games you play. I'll text back right away." That seemed to lift the mood slightly. Caleb perked up and said, "I'll draw dinosaurs and send them to you." A small smile touched Colton's lips. "I'd love that, buddy." Grace observed the exchange with a thoughtful expression, her eyes flicking to Colton's. She seemed proud of how he handled the tough conversation, balancing honesty with reassurance. They stayed there, sipping juices and nibbling on crackers as the atmosphere slowly recovered. The kids brightened, talking about which animals they'd draw for him. Eventually, they ventured back into the play area for one last round, and Colton tried to memorize every silly detail. Callie's squeal when she threw a ball at Caleb, the determined look on Caleb's face as he scaled a plastic climbing wall. These were images he'd carry with him across continents, a reminder of what waited for him at home. When it was time to leave, Grace herded the twins into jackets, and they all stepped outside. The afternoon sun had grown warmer, and a gentle breeze carried the promise of spring. Standing beside Grace's car in the parking lot, Colton offered a crooked smile. "Thank you for meeting me here," he said quietly. "I needed to see them." Grace nodded, her gaze warm but laced with concern. "I'm glad you did. Just call when you can, okay?" Before he could answer, Callie launched herself at him for a hug. Caleb followed suit, pressing his face against Colton's side. He knelt to properly embrace them both, heart pounding with the realization that this was what he would miss most. "Bye, Daddy," Callie said, her voice muffled against his chest. "Come back soon." "You got it," he managed. Caleb just squeezed him, no words necessary. After a moment, Colton gently released them. Grace opened the back door, helping the kids climb into their booster seats. Facing him one last time, she murmured, "Travel safe. They'll be waiting." A wave of emotion welled in Colton's throat. He leaned in, pressing a light kiss to Grace's cheek, a gesture of gratitude and something else undefined. "Thank you," he said, "for everything." She paused, a flicker of surprise in her eyes, then smiled softly. "See you soon," she whispered, sliding into the driver's seat. Colton watched as they drove away, a hollow ache already forming at the thought of distance. He stayed there for a moment, letting traffic flow around him in the parking lot. This was the sacrifice, leaving behind the very people he'd only just begun to know. But if he was going to provide for them, if he was to keep the business thriving, he had to face the demands head-on. By tomorrow afternoon, he'd be on a plane, heading to negotiate face-to-face with a client who insisted on his presence. He hoped it would be the last trip he'd make under such pressure, because standing in this parking lot watching Grace's car shrink on the horizon, he realized a new truth about himself. Success in business mattered, but not at the cost of these moments with his children. He inhaled, heading to his own car with renewed resolve. He would do this, but on his terms, get in, handle the contract, and get home as quickly as possible. Every day away would be another day missing out on bedtime stories and playful calls. He would not allow it to stretch longer than necessary. After all, fatherhood had become his priority now, and that meant he would move mountains, cross oceans, do whatever it took to keep the promise he'd made to two little kids who finally believed he'd always come back to them. A restless haze of time zones and half-slept nights defined Colton's week abroad. From the moment he landed on foreign soil, corporate documents in one hand, phone clutched tightly in the other, he felt torn between his responsibilities as a CEO and the role of father he'd so recently embraced. Every day was a blur of meetings, on-site risk assessments, and high-stakes negotiations. Yet no matter how packed his schedule became, he carved out windows in the early morning or late at night to video call Grace and the twins. At first, the calls were brief. Caleb would show him a half-finished dinosaur drawing, or Callie would wave her unicorn plush in front of the camera, singing a little tune. Grace orchestrated these sessions with careful scheduling, keeping the kids awake or waking them early so time differences didn't rob them of those precious moments. Despite the miles, each video call felt like a lifeline. Colton would smile, telling them about the really tall buildings in this distant city and reassuring them he was safe. Still, it wasn't easy. More than once, Colton found himself pacing a sterile hotel room, the neon-lit skyline of an unfamiliar city stretching beyond the window. He'd finish a late-night call with Grace, who always gave him a kind, steady update about the children, and then he'd stare at the clock, counting down days, hours, minutes, until he could fly home. Memories of their laughter haunted him as he tried to sleep. He'd catch glimpses of local families wandering the streets and feel a sharp ache, knowing he was missing bedtime stories and after-school chatter. Meanwhile, the negotiations were grueling. The international client had demanded Colton's personal presence, and they didn't hesitate to push for additional terms now that they had him on site. His security background lent credibility to the project, but it also placed him in the center of every decision. Each day, new challenges arose. They wanted deeper background checks, extended scope, or changes to the operational plan. In years past, Colton would have soldiered through without complaint, relishing the thrill of sealing a massive contract. Now, every extra day they stretched out these talks felt like a personal affront. He couldn't let frustration sabotage the deal, but neither would he be cornered into staying longer than promised. By midweek, his phone calls with the twins had grown more urgent. Caleb asked repeatedly when he was coming back, and Callie said things like, "I forgot what your house looks like, Daddy." Though she giggled afterward as though it were a joke, the comment stung him deeply. He tried to keep a confident front, telling them, "Soon, I'll be back soon, and we'll do something special." Yet as he clicked "end call," an undercurrent of guilt pressed on him, heavier than any financial burden he'd faced. On Thursday evening, after a grueling 8-hour meeting, he retreated to his hotel room, collapsed into a chair, and dialed Grace again. The phone rang several times. At last, she answered in a low whisper, explaining that the twins had just fallen asleep. He felt a wave of disappointment that he'd missed them, but also relief that they at least were resting well. "How are you?" Grace asked gently, her voice reflecting concern. "You sound exhausted." "I'm fine," he said, exhaling. "They're dragging this out, but I'm determined to wrap it up tomorrow. I told them I'm leaving on Saturday with or without a signed contract." Her hushed laugh betrayed sympathy. "That's a bold stance, but if anyone can pull it off, it's you, and the kids will be thrilled if you come home early." "Thanks," he murmured, leaning his head back against the chair's cushion. The tension in his neck felt like steel cables. "How are they doing?" A pause. "They miss you, no question. But they're okay. Caleb's been drawing pictures of T-Rexes all week, saying he'll show you every detail when you're back. Callie keeps wanting to buy cookies because she says you like cookies too, and that means you're connected." Grace's warm chuckle drifted through the line. "They just want you home, Colton." His eyes closed, fighting the ache in his chest. "I'm almost there. Tell them that for me. Tomorrow's the final day, one last session, then I'm heading straight to the airport. I promise." "Okay," she said softly. "Be safe. We'll see you soon." The call ended, leaving him alone with his resolve. He forced himself into a quick shower, then tried to grab a few hours of restless sleep. Dawn broke on a dreary, overcast cityscape, but Colton felt wired, determined. He walked into the final negotiation wearing a crisp suit, steely confidence in every stride. The client opened with more demands, but he refused to bend further, politely pointing out that his company had already offered the best possible terms. Afternoon wore on. Voices were raised, then softened. Documents slid back and forth, marked in pen and typed into laptops. His phone buzzed in his pocket, Dan checking in, but Colton ignored it, laser-focused on concluding this deal. At last, An agreement was reached. The contract was sealed. Colton, concealing his impatience, exchanged the obligatory handshakes. "Pleasure doing business," he said evenly, but in his mind he was already halfway out the door. The moment he stepped outside, the humid air hit him, and he dialed the airline to confirm his seat on the earliest flight home. He had to wait until the next morning, which meant a long night at the airport hotel, but it was better than lingering. That final night, he drank a single cup of coffee in the terminal cafe, bouncing his knee anxiously as an entire day crawled by. By dawn on Saturday, he boarded the plane, feeling like a runner at the starting blocks. Each second on that runway was another second away from the twins. Hours later, at last, the airplane's tires screeched on the runway back in his home city. He grabbed his carry-on, weaving impatiently through the crowd. After passing through customs and retrieving his luggage, he stepped onto the curb, the familiar skyline greeting him. A driver from his company stood with a sign, but Colton waved him off. "I'll get a cab," he muttered, preferring the anonymity and speed. Not long after, he was back at his condo, practically sprinting to the elevator. The tension in his shoulders began to ease as he visualized the twins playing in the living room again. But an empty condo wasn't what he wanted in that moment. He wanted them, Grace, Caleb, and Callie. Deciding on the spot, he texted Grace, "Just landed. I'm heading to your place, unless you'd rather come here." Her immediate response made him grin. "We're at home. Come over. The kids are excited." His heart thumped with relief. Within minutes, he was back in a taxi, weaving through afternoon traffic until he reached Grace's modest apartment complex, a small building on a quiet street. He spotted her waiting outside with the twins, who were climbing on a low brick wall near the entrance. The moment the cab pulled up, they spotted him, and he saw a burst of joy on their little faces. He barely had time to pay the driver before they raced toward him. Callie all but launched herself at his legs, and Caleb wrapped his arms around his waist, pressing his face against Colton's jacket. The raw happiness in their expressions nearly overwhelmed him. "You're here!" Callie exclaimed, tugging at his jacket. "I told Mommy you'd come back soon." "I missed you guys so much," he managed, ruffling Caleb's hair and pulling Callie into a warm hug. Grace approached, a subdued smile of welcome on her lips. "How was the trip?" she asked softly as the kids chattered away about their week. "Long," he answered, breathing in the fresh air of this familiar neighborhood. "Too long, but it's done, and I'm here." Grace nodded, stepping back so he could kneel, letting the twins show him their new drawings. Caleb had about 5 sketches, mostly T-Rex themed, while Callie had scribbled hearts and stick figures that, she explained, represented them all as a family. Colton's throat tightened at the depiction. A tall figure for him, a medium figure for Grace, 2 small ones for Caleb and Callie, all holding hands. "Hey," he murmured, glancing up at Grace, "why don't we all go get ice cream or something? My treat." Caleb and Callie erupted in gleeful agreement. Grace shrugged with a smile. "Sure, that'd be great." Colton extended a hand to each twin. "Lead the way, kiddos." They didn't know exactly where they were going, but that didn't matter. They pranced forward, guiding him down the sidewalk. Grace fell into step beside Colton, occasionally placing a steadying hand on Callie's shoulder when she veered too close to the curb. As they walked, the warmth of the afternoon sun glowed on their faces, and an unspoken contentment wove between them. Colton caught Grace's eye, and she offered him a look that was both relieved and proud, as if to say, "I knew you'd keep your promise." He responded with a small nod, silently vowing that from now on he'd do everything in his power to be present, a stable force in the twins' lives. When they reached the little ice cream shop, the kids scrambled inside, eagerly pointing at the glass display of colorful flavors. Colton chuckled, stepping up to the counter and asking them what they wanted. Caleb insisted on chocolate chip. Callie demanded something pink and sparkly. Grace, with a soft laugh, chose vanilla with caramel drizzle. They carried their treats to a small outdoor table on the sidewalk. Sitting there, the 4 of them formed a tight circle, indulging in the sweetness of cones and cups. Drips of melted ice cream quickly dotted the table, Caleb tried to catch them with napkins while Callie giggled about her bright pink tongue. Colton found himself simply watching, soaking in every detail. Grace's gentle guidance as she wiped sticky hands, the children's giggles at each other's colorful tongues, the soft breeze rustling trees overhead. The swirl of chaos and joy felt more than normal. It felt right. He gazed at Grace, who met his eyes and flushed slightly under his intent look. "What?" she asked, smiling. He hesitated, searching for words. "Just thank you for believing I could do this, for letting me be here." She lowered her gaze to her melting ice cream. "I'm glad you came back when you did," she said quietly. "The kids need you, and I never realized how much I needed someone to share this load. I know it won't always be easy, but I have faith." A gentle tug on his sleeve drew his attention downward. Callie was offering him a bite of her pink, sparkly flavor. "Try it, Daddy." He leaned down, taking a playful lick. Very tasty," he declared, and the children squealed with delight. In that moment, the swirl of city life and business obligations felt distant. Here, he was simply a father, a man who had discovered that success was more than contracts and corporate accolades. It was also spelled out in the carefree laughter of his children. No matter what challenges lay ahead, business crises, custody arrangements, or the complexities of forging a relationship with Grace, he knew these small, precious moments were worth everything. The sun shone warmly, and somewhere in the gentle breeze, Colton felt the promise of a future he couldn't have predicted. A family, a chance at redemption. And as the twins tugged him back onto the sidewalk, urging him to race them to the next street lamp, he followed with eager steps. Because now he understood he was running towards something immeasurably more important than any mission he'd ever undertaken. A life united with the children he loved, ready to face every high and low that might come their way. Together. So we come to the end of today's story. If you liked it, don't forget to give us a thumbs up. We love reading your comments. They're the best reward for the effort we make to bring you these stories. The most gratifying part of our work is knowing we're your company, bringing reflections that make us grow as human beings. Lastly, I encourage you to subscribe to Narrated Words and activate the bell if you haven't already, so you don't miss any of our stories. Share them with your loved ones, because we love being here by your side. Blessings. If you enjoyed this story, don't miss the next one. Just click on the screen.